Chapter 1. At the Dawn of Time. The Early Formative Period. c. 2000 BCE, 250 CE. From nomads to settlers. Our journey begins in the distant past, around 2,000 years before the Common Era. Across vast and varied lands, including today's southeastern Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, and its surrounding regions, all of Guatemala and Belize, as well as the western edges of Honduras and El Salvador. The ancient tribes' ancestors of the Maya were making their first steps away from the nomadic life of hunters and gatherers toward a settled agricultural existence. This transition, which unfolded over centuries, became a true turning point in their lives and laid the foundation for their future civilization. The sacred gift of maize. Maize played a central role in this transformation. For the Maya, it was not merely a crop, but a sacred gift of the gods, the very basis of their sustenance, economy, and even their understanding of the world. Maya myths, later recorded in the Popol Vuh, tell that the gods created humankind out of maize dough itself. Alongside maize, they cultivated beans, squash, several varieties of chili peppers, sweet potatoes, manioc, a starchy root, tomatoes, and the prized cacao. From cacao beans, they prepared a rich, frothy, and bitter drink, reserved for the elite and used in sacred rituals. The beans themselves often served as a form of currency, equally important, or cotton, grown for weaving cloth, and tobacco, used in ceremonial smoking. Early settlements and social changes. The first permanent communities were small villages scattered across river valleys, coastal lowlands, and foothills. Their homes were built of perishable materials, wood, clay, and thatch. Yet, by around 1000 BCE, signs of growing social complexity began to appear. Leaders emerged, perhaps priests, healers, or respected elders, who held special authority and knowledge. The earliest communal structures also appeared, low earthen or stone platforms that likely supported temples or the dwellings of chiefs. Archaeological finds from this period, such as clay pottery, show that crafts were developing. Early ceramics, for example, the gourd-shaped vessels of the Barra culture in coastal Chiapas around 1800 BCE, were simple at first, but gradually became more varied in form and decoration. Distinct regional styles began to emerge as well, such as the Swazi-type pottery in Belize from the Cuello site, c. 1200-900 BCE, and the Maymom ceramic complex, c. 900-300 BCE, which spread across much of the Maya lowlands. Olmec influence and the foundations of Maya culture. The early formative period was far from a time of isolation. The Maya actively interacted with other cultures of ancient Mesoamerica, and among these, the Olmecs, often called the mother culture of the region, had a particularly profound influence, flourishing along the Gulf Coast of Mexico between roughly 1400 and 400 BCE. The Olmecs helped shape many of the religious and artistic traditions that would become central to Maya civilization. From the Olmecs to the rise of Maya cities, the Maya likely borrowed a number of religious concepts from the Olmecs, such as the veneration of the jaguar and the feathered serpent, as well as certain symbolic motifs, including the distinctive Olmec-style faces with downturned corners of the mouth. They may also have inherited from the Olmecs elements of timekeeping, like the 260-day ritual calendar, and perhaps even the first traces of writing and the notion of the divine authority of rulers. Major Olmec centers, such as La Venta, San Lorenzo, and Tres Zapotes, displayed a remarkable level of organization and monumental artistry. Colossal stone heads, altars, and carved stone stelae works that undoubtedly impressed their neighbors. Objects in Olmec style or showing Olmec influence have been found at many early Maya sites, including those in the Belize Valley and throughout Guatemala, flourishing during the Middle and Late Pre-Classic periods. Growth of settlements and sacred architecture by the middle of the early formative period, roughly between 600 and 400 BCE. Maya settlements grew larger, showing the first signs of urban life. Ritual centers began to emerge, featuring more complex architecture. Characteristic of this era were the so-called E-groups, architectural complexes consisting of a pyramid on the west side and a long platform with 3 buildings on the east. These structures were aligned to mark the sunrise points during the equinoxes and solstices, reflecting the early development of astronomical observation and its ritual significance. Examples of such complexes have been found at Oaxaca, Saibal, and other sites. The late pre-classic boom, c. 300 BCE, 250 CE. This period marked a true breakthrough in the southern lowlands, especially in the Mirador Basin in northern Guatemala. Enormous cities arose. The most impressive of these was El Mirador, which flourished between about 150 BCE and 150 CE, and astonishes researchers even today with the scale of its construction. The La Danta complex at El Mirador consists of a massive basal platform about 300 x 600 meters and 7 meters high, supporting several pyramids and palace structures. Together they reach a total height of roughly 72 meters, making La Danta one of the largest pyramidal constructions in the world by volume. Another major pyramid at El Mirador, El Tigre, rises to about 55 meters. The city was connected to neighboring centers such as Nakbe and Tikal by a network of white limestone plastered causeways known as Sakbio. These roads, some up to 40 meters wide and stretching for dozens of kilometers, reveal a high level of organization and immense collective labor toward the classic Maya civilization. In El Mirador and other cities of this era, including Nakbe, San Bartolo, Cival, and Camino Chuyu in the Guatemalan highlands, the latter strongly influenced by the great center of Teotihuacan. We already see the fully formed traits of the future classic Maya civilization. Monumental stepped pyramids with temples on their summits, palatial complexes adorned with enormous stucco deity masks, such as jaguar gods or bird deities on pyramid facades. A rich system of symbolic imagery. Some of the earliest inscriptions appear here as well, notably the famous multicolored murals of San Bartolo, dating to around 100 BCE, depicting the myth of the world's creation and the maize god, and containing early hieroglyphic signs. Society became increasingly stratified. Powerful rulers emerged, claiming divine status and controlling extensive territories and resources. By the end of the pre-classic period, the foundations of the city-state political system had been laid, and long-distance trade networks had developed. Volcanic obsidian from the highlands, jade from the Motagua Valley, and marine shells from the Pacific coast all circulated among these thriving centers. Advances in agriculture and the seeds of a golden age. Agricultural techniques continued to improve. The Maya began to use terraced fields on hillsides and raised garden beds in wetlands. Innovations that increased crop yields and shaped the foundation of their civilization for centuries to come. Yet around 150 CE, the great pre-classic cities, including the mighty El Mirador, fell into decline and were eventually abandoned. The The reasons for this early collapse remain uncertain. Scholars suggest it may have been caused by environmental challenges such as soil exhaustion, deforestation, prolonged droughts, or perhaps by internal strife and power struggles over land and resources. But the seeds of Maya civilization had already been planted, ready to flourish again during the next most brilliant stage of their history, the Classic Period. Chapter 2, The Golden Age, the Classic Period, c. 250-900 CE. We now enter the most celebrated, radiant, and well-studied era of Maya history, the Classic Period, when Maya civilization reached the height of its achievements in art, architecture, science, and political power. During this age, the Maya lowlands blossomed into a mosaic of independent city-states, each competing for dominance, building magnificent monuments, and leaving behind invaluable records carved in stone. The start of the Classic Period is traditionally marked by the appearance of the first dated stone monuments, inscribed using the long count calendar. For example, Stela 29 from Tikal, dated to 292 CE, is among the earliest known monuments of this kind, a patchwork of cities, rulers, and rivalries. Unlike centralized empires such as Rome or the later Aztec Empire, the classic Maya world consisted of a network of independent or semi-independent city-states. These were linked by shifting alliances, often sealed by marriage ties between royal families, by tribute relationships, fealty, and inevitably by warfare. Each city-state was ruled by a divine king, regarded as a sacred intermediary between the human and the supernatural realms. He was believed to be a descendant of the gods, responsible for the fertility of the land, the prosperity of his people, and success in warfare. His authority was reinforced through elaborate rituals, including acts of bloodletting and human sacrifice. The great cities of the classic Maya, among the hundreds of known classic Maya cities, a few rose to exceptional prominence. Foremost was Tikal, located deep in the Petén jungles of Guatemala. Tikal was one of the largest, most powerful, and longest-lasting Maya city-states. Though its origins reach back to the pre-classic era, its true golden age came during the Classic Period. Tikal became renowned for its towering pyramids, such as the magnificent Temple 4, the Temple of the Double-Headed Serpent, which soars to 65 meters, over 210 feet, making it one of the tallest pre-Columbian structures in the Americas. The city's core also featured an expansive palatial complex known as the Central Acropolis, a cluster of royal residences and ceremonial buildings that reflected Tikal's immense power and cultural sophistication. North Acropolis, the royal burial ground of Tikal, was lined with countless carved stone stelae and altars. For centuries, Tikal waged long and bitter wars against its greatest rival, Calakmul. Among Tikal's most renowned rulers was Jan Kawil the Friar, who reigned from 682 to 734 CE. He defeated Calakmul, reunified the fractured kingdom, and restored its former glory after a long decline in the 6th century, caused by earlier defeats at the hands of Calakmul and Karakol. His tomb was discovered beneath the Temple Thorn, the Temple of the Great Jaguar, one of the most iconic monuments of Tikal. Calakmul, located deep in the tropical forests of what is now southern Campeche, Mexico, was itself a colossal Maya city with monumental architecture. Its structure, too, is one of the largest Maya pyramids, rising about 45 meters, and the city ruled over an extensive network of subordinate kingdoms. Its emblem, the serpent's head glyph, appears on monuments throughout the Maya world, a sign of Calakmul's vast influence. During the 7th century, Calakmul reached the height of its power, forging alliances against Tikal and inflicting upon it a series of crushing defeats. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul became a kind of Cold War of the classic Maya period, shaping the political landscape of the entire region for centuries. Far to the west, at the foothills of the Tumbala Mountains in present-day Mexico, lay Palenque, celebrated for its refined architecture, graceful stucco and stone reliefs, and an extraordinary wealth of inscriptions. Its Temple of the Inscriptions became famous in 1952 when Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Loeillet uncovered the untouched tomb of the great ruler Kinich Janab Pakal Thuram, or Pakal the Great, who reigned from 615 to 683 CE. The stone sarcophagus of Pakal, with its iconic carved lid, showing the king at the moment of death and cosmic rebirth, is considered a masterpiece of Maya art. The palace complex of Palenque, crowned by a 4-story tower likely used for observation, with inner courtyards and galleries adorned with intricate relief panels, still impresses visitors with its elegance and complexity. Palenque's sculptures stand out for their remarkable plasticity, realism, and attention to fine detail. To the south, in modern-day Honduras, on the banks of the Copan River, flourished the city of Copan, a major center of science and the arts. It became famous for its magnificent stelae and altars carved from the local green volcanic stone, displaying astonishing craftsmanship and detail. The stelae of Copan depict kings in elaborate ceremonial attire, often so deeply carved that they seem almost fully three-dimensional. The hieroglyphic stairway of Temple 26 in Copan contains the longest known Maya inscription, over 2,200 glyphs, narrating the dynastic history of the city for more than 3 centuries. Copan was also a crucial hub for astronomical observations and calendar calculations. The city's founding ruler was said to be Kinich Yaxcoch Mo, radiant green Quetzalcoatl, possibly originating from Teotihuacan or a related cultural center. On the banks of the Usumacinta River, along today's border of Mexico and Guatemala, stood Yaxchilan and Piedras Negras, both famed for their elaborately carved lintels above doorways. These scenes capture rituals of bloodletting, diplomatic receptions, and military triumphs. Yaxchilan's lintels are especially famous for depicting King Itzamnaj B, Alam Badwim, Shield Jaguar II, and his queen, Lady K, Abal Suk, performing sacred vision quest rituals. Further east, in the valley of the Motagua River in Guatemala, lay the smaller city of Quirigua, originally a vassal of Copan in 738 CE. Its ruler, K. Ake Tiliuchan Yopad, sky-burning fire, captured and sacrificed Copan as King Uaxaclajun Ub Ake Awil 18 Rabbit. After this dramatic victory, Quirigua gained independence and entered a period of prosperity. It became renowned for its colossal stelae, the tallest in the entire Maya world, with Stela E reaching over 10 meters in height and weighing about 65 tons, as well as for altars of elaborate forms, often shaped like animals. They were carefully planned ceremonial centers. At their heart stood great plazas, often several, surrounded by soaring pyramids, temples, palaces, administrative buildings, astronomical observatories, and ball courts. for the sacred Mesoamerican ball game. Around these cores spread the residential quarters of nobles and artisans, while on the outskirts lived the farmers in humble wooden and clay houses with thatched roofs clustered in small rural hamlets. The great Maya cities were bound together by powerful white causeways, known as Sakbiob, sacred roads that gleamed in the sun as they cut through the dense jungle. Maya society of the classic period was strictly stratified, organized from the divine ruler at the summit to the humble farmers who worked the fields. At the very top stood the Holy Lord, whose role was multifaceted: supreme priest, commander-in-chief, chief judge, and organizer of great public works. His power was believed to have been granted by the gods themselves. Many rulers traced their lineage back to mythical founders and were expected to uphold cosmic order through successful rituals that ensured the favor of the gods. Power was typically inherited from father to son, yet women too could hold great authority. Some served as regents or even as ruling queens. For example, Ixyol Ignal and Sakuk of Palanca, whose reigns were pivotal in their city's history. Beneath the ruler stood the nobility, vassal lords, keepers of sacred books, high officials, generals, governors of subordinate centers, and high-ranking priests. They owned land, led ceremonies and wars, and filled key administrative, military, and religious offices. Their privileged status was marked by luxurious cotton and feather garments, jade and seashell ornaments, elaborate headdresses, and access to fine painted pottery and other prestigious goods. The priesthood formed another powerful class, the guardians of sacred knowledge, watchers of the heavens, skilled mathematicians, scribes, diviners, and healers. They were responsible for keeping the calendars, interpreting omens, recording history, and performing the sacred rites that kept the universe in balance. Priests were closely tied to the ruling elite, often drawn from the younger sons of kings or members of noble families. The warriors of the Maya played a crucial role, especially during eras of frequent conflict. Military valor and the capture of prisoners for sacrifice were highly esteemed and could elevate a warrior's social standing. Below them were the craftsmen, the skilled hands of the civilization, master stone carvers, potters, weavers, jewelers, and wood and bone carvers. Their creations were essential both for daily noble life and for the splendor of ritual ceremonies. Some artisans served directly at court, enjoying special status and favor. The merchants sustained both local and long-distance trade, bringing to the cities the goods and luxury items they required. Some grew wealthy and influential, sometimes even serving as envoys or spies for their rulers. The farmers, the simple folk, the backbone of Maya civilization, made up the vast majority of the population, around 80–90%. They cultivated the land, often communal fields overseen by the nobility, growing crops and paying tribute in the form of harvest, handcrafted goods, and labor to the lords and rulers. They also took part in large public works, building temples, palaces, roads, and maintaining the estates of the elite. Most lived in small village communities clustered around ceremonial centers. At the very bottom of society were the slaves, prisoners of war, criminals, and debtors. They were used for heavy labor as domestic servants, and at times as victims in ritual sacrifices. Slavery, however, was not hereditary. A child born to a slave was free. This complex social structure enabled the functioning of the city-states and the creation of the great achievements of Maya culture. Economic foundations. Maize, trade, and labor agriculture formed the backbone of the Maya economy, with maize, corn, at its heart. Other important crops included beans, squash, cacao, cotton, tobacco, agave, used for fiber, and drinks, and a variety of fruits, avocado, papaya, guava, along with vegetables and medicinal plants. The Maya developed a range of farming techniques, adapting to different environments. Slash and burn, milpa agriculture. In the lowlands, forest plots were cleared, dried, and burned. The ash fertilized the soil. After 2 to 4 years of use, the plot was left fallow for 10 to 20 years to recover. This method required vast tracts of land, terraced farming. In hilly and mountainous regions, stone terraces were built to prevent soil erosion, retain moisture, and expand arable land. Raised fields and canal systems. In swampy lowlands, the Maya constructed artificial raised beds separated by canals, which helped regulate water levels, enriched the soil with canal silt, and allowed for multiple harvests each year. Irrigation. In drier areas or for intensive gardening, they used canals to water their crops. Forest gardens. The Maya also practiced a form of forest management, cultivating useful trees, fruits, nuts, medicinal plants, and timber without disrupting the natural woodland ecosystem. Trade and exchange trade played a crucial role in both the economy and cultural exchange. The Maya lacked draft animals and the wheel for transport, so goods were carried by human porters, using a strap over the forehead or chest to bear the weight along jungle trails and the white causeways. They also relied on dugout canoes, navigating rivers and the coastline to connect distant regions. Trade goods, from necessities to sacred luxuries. The trade networks of the Maya moved a vast variety of goods across the jungles, mountains, and coasts. Everyday necessities included salt, gathered from the Yucatan coastline and the highland salt flats, as well as obsidian, the volcanic glass prized for blades and weapons, imported from the highlands of Guatemala and central Mexico. Other utilitarian materials were flint and basalt, used for grinding stones. The Maya also exchanged a wealth of luxury and ritual goods. Jade, highly prized, symbolizing life, fertility, maize, and water, sourced mainly from the Motagua River Valley. Brilliant quetzal and macaw feathers, the vivid greens, blues, and reds reserved for the elite. Jaguar pelts, cacao beans, which served both as currency and as an ingredient for a sacred drink. Tobacco, copal resin for incense and offerings. Marine shells, especially spondylus and strombus, symbols of water and fertility, carried inland from the Caribbean and Pacific coasts. Pirate for mirrors, cinnabar for its brilliant red pigment, finely painted ceramics, cotton textiles, honey, and beeswax. Great trading hubs emerged in cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, and later Chichen Itza, linking far-flung regions of the Maya world. These networks even extended beyond Maya lands, reaching Teotihuacan in central Mexico and exchanging goods with peoples of Central America and the Caribbean basin. Warfare, ritual, power, and conquest. War was an inseparable part of Maya life during the Classic period. Its motives ranged from the sacred to the strategic, capturing prisoners, especially noble enemies, for ritual sacrifices meant to appease the gods and showcase the ruler's power, securing control over trade routes and vital resources such as salt, cacao, and jade, expanding political influence, subjugating rival city-states, and extracting tribute. revenge for past defeats or the killing of relatives, dynastic disputes and struggles for the throne. Maya warriors wielded a variety of weapons: spears tipped with obsidian or flint, atlatls, spear throwers, for hurling darts, battle axes, clubs studded with stone or obsidian spikes, slings, and ritual knives. For protection, they carried round or rectangular shields made of wood and hide, wore quilted cotton armor, a technology adopted from central Mexico, and sometimes helmets of wood or leather. Scenes of battles, victories, and the presentation of captives to rulers were often recorded in stone stelae, carved lintels, and murals. The most famous of these are the Bonampak murals, which vividly depict fierce combat, the judgment of prisoners, and the celebration of victory with music and ritual dances. War among the Maya also carried a deep ritual meaning. Capturing a noble enemy and later sacrificing him, often through beheading or the removal of the heart, was considered a sacred act that strengthened the ruler as power and his bond with the gods. There were even more ritualized forms of conflict. One of them was the so-called Star Wars, marked by a special glyph and linked to precise astronomical events, such as the cycles of Venus. These wars were aimed less at conquering land than at capturing rival rulers for ceremonial sacrifice. Architecture and art, the embodiment of the cosmos and power. The Maya were extraordinary builders and artists. Their cities were never merely functional. They were deeply symbolic, reflecting their vision of the structure of the universe and reinforcing the divine authority of their kings, pyramids, and temples. The most iconic Maya structures were the step pyramids crowned with steep stairways, often 4 of them facing the cardinal directions. These stairs led up to small temples on the summit, usually consisting of 1 or several chambers. Temples were often built on top of older structures, layering sacred energy over generations. They symbolized the holy mountains, the dwelling places of the gods, and served as stages for the most important rituals. Atop these temples, high decorative roof combs were raised, adorned with stucco reliefs. Examples include Temple Thuan in Tikal, the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palang, and the Pyramid of the Magician in Uxmal, a later monument with deep classical roots, palaces, houses of power, and council. Maya palaces were vast, multi-roomed complexes, usually single-story but sometimes multi-level, as in the Palenque Palace. They served as royal residences, seats of administration, and places for receptions and council gatherings. Palaces often featured inner courtyards, columned galleries, thrones, and even towers. Notable examples are the central Acropolis in Tikal, the Palace of the Ruler in Uxmal, and the palace in Palenque itself. Observatories, watching the heavens. Many Maya cities contained structures built for observing the sky. These were often round in shape. The most famous is El Caracol, the snail, in Chichen Itza, a late but traditional design. Round towers in Palenque and elsewhere likely served similar purposes. Their windows and openings were carefully aligned with the rising and setting points of the sun, the moon, and Venus on significant calendar dates. Ball courts, the sacred game. Maya ball courts were typically shaped like a capital I or H, with 2 parallel sloping or vertical walls. Some had carved stone rings fixed high on the sides. The game was played with a heavy rubber ball that players struck with their hips, elbows, and knees, never with their hands or feet. This was far more than a sport. It symbolized the eternal struggle between light and darkness, echoing the myth of the hero twins who battled the lords of the underworld. Sometimes the game's outcome was tied to human sacrifice, white roads, the sacred Sakbe. Maya cities were connected by Sakbiyab, paved white roads coated with limestone plaster. These were not merely practical highways. They held ceremonial and symbolic meaning, linking sacred places and uniting distant city-states. Regional architectural styles. The architecture of the Maya varied by region and period. Baten style, massive pyramids with steep stairways and striking roof combs, typical of Tikal, Kalakmul, and Uaxactun. Usumachinta style, named after the Usumachinta River, more elegant and ornate, with detailed stucco and stone reliefs, intricate lattice-like roof combs, and special vaulted ceilings supported by interior piers. The Maya arch and regional styles. The Maya arch, also known as the corbel or stepped vault, was not a true arch in the modern sense. It was created by gradually overlapping rows of masonry until they met at the top. This architectural feature is especially characteristic of Palang, Yaxchilan, and Bonampak. The northern styles, Pu, Chenes, and Riobek, in the late Classic period, roughly from the 6th to the 9th centuries CE, new styles blossomed in the northern Yucatan. Puke style, named after the hilly Puke region. Its buildings were marked by smooth lower walls and richly decorated upper facades. Stone mosaic friezes displayed geometric patterns, latticework, zigzags, stylized huts, and above all, countless masks of the long-nosed rain god, Chahak. Notable sites include Uxmal, Kaba, Sayil, and Labna. Chenes style, named after a region dotted with natural wells. Its facades often represented the gigantic mask of a mythical earth monster. The doorway itself formed the creature S open mouth. Sculptural ornamentation covered nearly every inch of the wall surface. Examples can be seen at Hojob and Sibilnokak. Rio Bec style, named after another region in the southern Yucatan. Here, the architecture is famous for its tower-like facades that imitate the tall Pitan pyramids, but are purely decorative, without interior chambers, and with extremely steep, unusable stairways. The facades were lavishly ornamented as well. Key sites include Rio Bec, Xpuil, and Beckham. Art, stone, stucco, and color Maya sculptors excelled in carving stelae. Tall, upright stone slabs that depicted rulers in ritual poses, surrounded by gods and ancestors, bearing symbols of power. Hieroglyphic texts recorded their deeds, reigns, genealogies, and important dates. Altars, often circular and sometimes shaped like animal thrones, were set in front of the stelae. Other works included carved stone lintels, wall panels, and beams. Materials such as limestone, sandstone, and volcanic tuff were used with remarkable skill. Relief carving reached extraordinary heights in cities like Copan, with its deep, high-relief figures, almost fully three-dimensional. In Palang, with its elegance and flowing forms, and in Yaxchilan, known for its vivid, dynamic scenes. Although depictions of rulers followed strict conventions, they often captured individual traits and even emotion. Stucco and painted decoration, a lime plaster material similar to gypsum made from burned limestone, was widely used to create three-dimensional reliefs and sculptures adorning building facades. For instance, the great deity masks at El Mirador, Gohon Lake, and the ornate stucco friezes of Palong. These were brightly painted in vivid colors. Ceramics. Maya artisans produced a wide range of ceramic vessels, from simple utilitarian pots and storage jars to refined works of high artistry. The most celebrated is the polychrome pottery of the classic period, painted with fine brushes and natural pigments. Cylindrical vases, plates, and bowls often depict scenes from the Popol Vuh myths, ritual ball games, dances, sacrifices, courtly ceremonies, rulers seated on thrones, musicians, dwarfs, historical figures, animals, plants, and hieroglyphic texts. A standard dedicatory formula frequently named the owner and the vessel's purpose. Such vessels were prized in burials and served as luxury and diplomatic gifts. Distinct regional ceramic styles are known. Murals. Only a few murals have survived because of the humid climate, yet some are spectacular. The most famous are the frescoes of Bonampak in Chiapas, Mexico, painted around 790 CE and rediscovered in 1946. They cover the walls of 3 temple rooms with vivid, dynamic scenes. Preparations for battle, the battle itself, the judgment of captives, and the grand celebration of victory with dances, music, and processions. These murals provide invaluable insight into Maya clothing, weaponry, rituals, and social life. Other mural fragments have been found at Oaxactun, San Bartolo, an early example, and Tulum, a late example, carving in wood, bone, and shell Maya. Craftsmen also created exquisite objects from wood, bone, and shell. Carved wooden beams such as those in Temple 4 at Tikal, boxes, figurines, ornaments, and musical instruments. Many were decorated with delicate engraving and hieroglyphic inscriptions, jewelry, and symbolic art. Because of the fragility of many materials, only a few Maya jewelry pieces have survived. Carved jade masks, necklaces, earrings, chest ornaments, and figurines. Items of obsidian, pyrite inlaid to create mosaic mirrors, and spondylus shells. Gold and other metals appeared only later, in the post-classic period, mostly as imported goods and primarily used for ritual objects and the adornment of the elite. Maya art was never merely decorative. It was charged with symbols, expressing their view of the cosmos, legitimizing the power of their rulers, recording history, and serving as a bridge of communication with the divine world. Intellectual heights, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and the calendar. The intellectual achievements of the Maya were as impressive as their architecture and art. Writing system. The Maya created the only fully developed writing system in pre-Columbian America, a mixed script of logograms and syllabic signs. Some glyphs represented entire words or ideas. For example, a jaguar sign or a sky sign. Others stood for syllables such as kai, ke, ki, ko, q. A single syllable could be written in several different ways, and one glyph could have several readings. Texts were usually read left to right, top to bottom, arranged in double columns. They were carved on stone monuments, altars, beams, panels, painted on ceramics, bones, shells, inscribed on murals, and written in folded bark paper codices, long strips made from the inner bark of the fig tree coated on both sides with a white lime plaster surface. Deciphering this script became one of the great intellectual triumphs of the 20th century. Key contributions came from Yuri Konorozov, who in the 1950s proposed the phonetic reading of the glyphs, and from Tatiana Proskouriakov, who in the 1960s demonstrated that the stone inscriptions recorded historical events. Later scholars, such as David Stewart, Linda Shealy, Peter Matthews, Stephen Houston, and Nikolai Gruba, further advanced the decipherment. Today, about 80–90% of known signs are understood, allowing scholars to read historical records, mythological texts, and calendrical calculations Sadly, most of the Maya goddesses were destroyed by Spanish friars, especially by Bishop Diego de Landa during the public burning of books in the town of Mani in 1562. Only 4 codices survive. The Dresden Codex, Germany, the most complete, containing astronomical tables of Venus, predictions of solar and lunar eclipses, and ritual almanacs. The Madrid Codex, Museum of the Americas, Madrid, the longest, with information on divination, rituals, agriculture, hunting, and beekeeping. The Paris Codex, National Library of Paris, fragmentary, dealing with 20-year cycles, prophecies, and symbols resembling the zodiac. The Grolier Codex, National Museum of Anthropology, Mexico City, long debated but now accepted by most scholars, fragmentary and devoted mainly to the cycle of Venus. Mathematics. The Maya used a vigesimal base 20 system, probably inspired by counting on both fingers and toes. Numbers were written with dots for ones and bars for fives. For example, the number 19 was shown as 3 bars, 15 plus 4 dots. Most importantly, they independently developed and used the concept of zero, symbolized by a stylized shell or flower sign. Zero served as a placeholder, enabling them to perform complex arithmetic, addition, subtraction, possibly multiplication and division, and to record very large numbers needed for astronomical observations and calendrical calculations, astronomy, and the calendar. The Maya were skilled sky watchers, carefully tracking the movements of the sun, moon, planets, especially Venus, and the cycles of the heavens to structure their ritual and agricultural life. They calculated the length of the solar year with astonishing precision, 365 days in about a quarter of a day, remarkably close to the modern value. They also tracked the lunar month, the cycles of Venus, 584 days with only a tiny error across 5 centuries, as well as the movements of Mars and other planets. Though their observatories lacked lenses, the Maya built stone structures that allowed them to mark key celestial events. The rising and setting of stars at specific points on the horizon, and the moment when the sun passed directly overhead at its highest point in the sky. The calendar system. The Maya developed an extraordinarily complex, multi-layered calendar, used both for practical purposes, like agriculture, and for rituals and prophecy. The ritual calendar, Tzolk'in. It had 260 days, formed by combining 20-day names with 13 numbers. Each day had its own unique pairing of name and number, for example, for Ajah, and carried its own prophetic meaning. This sacred calendar is still used today by some Maya communities. The origin of the 260-day cycle is uncertain. It may be linked to the length of human pregnancy or to early agricultural cycles. The civil solar calendar, Hab. This one counted 365 days, 18 months of 20 days each, 360 days, plus 5 extra, nameless or unlucky days, seen as a dangerous transitional time. The hobby did not include leap years, so its start date slowly shifted relative to the seasons. The calendar round. By combining the Tzolk'in and the Hab, the Maya created repeating day names like 4 Ajah 8 Kumku. This exact combination returned only once every 52 Hab years, or 73 Tzolk'in years, about 18,180 days. The 52-year cycle was one of the most significant spans of time. Its ending was often marked by the new fire ceremonies. The long count A linear system that counted the days from a mythical starting date, equivalent to August 13th, 3114 BCE in our calendar. Dates were written in groups of units. Kian, 1 day Winal, 20 days, Tun, 18 winhalls, 360 days. 1 year, Katun, 20 tuns, 7,200 days, 19.7 years. Baktun, 20 Katuns, 144,000 days, 394 years. For example, a day written is 9:15, 10.00 power. I draw 13 yaks means 9 Baktuns, 15 Katuns, 10 tons, 0 winhalls, 0 coins had passed since the mythical beginning. The completion of the 13th Baktun, December 21st, 2012, sparked modern speculation about a doomsday. For the ancient Maya, however, it was merely the close of one great cycle and the dawn of the next, much like the turning of a millennium in our own calendar, not the end of the world. Larger cycles. The Maya also conceived of even vaster cycles, reaching into almost unimaginable spans of time, evidence of their cosmic vision. Other cycles were tracked too. The lunar series, often added to stone inscriptions, noted the length of the current lunar month and its position within a 6-month cycle. The Venus cycle, crucial for prophecy and for timing warfare, described in detail in the Dresden Codex. Solar and lunar eclipse tables, also in the Dresden Codex, let them predict when eclipses were likely to occur. These astronomical insights allowed the Maya to plan their crops, schedule sacred ceremonies, launch military campaigns, and weave their history into the grand rhythm of the cosmos, religion, and the Maya world of gods, spirits, and ancestors. Religion permeated every aspect of Maya life, from birth to death, from the most ordinary daily tasks to the greatest affairs of the state. Their view of the world was complex and many-layered, reflecting a deep connection with nature and the cosmos. The pantheon of gods, the Maya worshipped a vast host of deities, many with multiple aspects, young or old, male or female, gentle or wrathful, each tied to forces of nature, celestial bodies, or human life. The gods were often depicted with a blend of human and animal features. Itzamna, the supreme creator god, lord of the heavens, of day and night, of wisdom, writing, and medicine, and patron of the priesthood, he was shown as an old man with a hooked nose and a toothless mouth, sometimes with lizard or bird traits. Ixchel, his consort, goddess of the moon, rainbows, fertility, weaving, medicine, and childbirth, but also of destructive storms and floods. She could appear as a young maiden, the waxing moon, or as an old crone with snakes in her hair and clawed hands. The waning moon, Kinij Ajal, the radiant lord of the sun, often regarded as Itzamna's daytime aspect, portrayed with large square eyes, a Roman-shaped nose, and sometimes with jaguar traits, the jaguar symbolizing the night sun traveling through the underworld. Jak, god of rain, thunder, lightning, and fertility, among the most revered deities, vital to farmers. He was shown with a long, drooping, often forked nose like a tapir's snout, snake-like fangs holding a stone axe, symbol of lightning, or a vessel of water. He appeared in 4 aspects, each linked to a cardinal direction and its sacred color. Yum-Kax, Yumil-Kaxob, the maize god, lord of the forest, a young, handsome deity, embodying maize through all its stages, growth, harvest, death, and rebirth. His cycle mirrored nature's eternal rhythm and human life itself, often depicted with a maze-shaped head or with corn leaves in his hair. The lords of death, Kimi, Kisin, Apuch, rulers of the underworld, portrayed as skeletal or decaying figures with dark spots on the flesh, death bells, and staring eyes sewn onto their garments. Keawil, Kavil, god of royal power, abundance, and lightning, recognizable by a cigar-shaped torch or tube passing through his forehead and a serpent-shaped leg. Maya rulers often held a ceremonial staff topped with the image of Kawil, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, akin to the central Mexican Quetzalcoatl, honored especially in the later period of Yucatan, a deity of wind, the morning star, Venus, wisdom, writing, the calendar, and even metallurgy, the goddess of suicide by hanging, patroness of those who ended their lives this way. Such souls were believed to enter a special heavenly paradise. There were also patron gods of noble lineages, cities, and trades. For example, Ekchua, god of merchants and of cacao. The four Bacabs, four Atlantean gods who held up the sky at the four cardinal points. The hero twins, Unapu and Expalanc, central figures of the Popol Vuh epic. They defeated the lords of the underworld in a deadly ball game and a series of trials, avenged the deaths of their father and uncle, and then ascended into the heavens to become the sun and the moon. The Maya vision of the universe. The Maya imagined the universe as multi-layered and cyclical. Above lay 13 heavens, each ruled by its own deity, through which the sun, the moon, and the wandering planets traveled on their daily paths. The earthly world was pictured as the back of a giant crocodile or turtle floating on the primordial ocean, sometimes as a flat square plane, with the four cardinal directions each marked by its own sacred color and tree. East, red north, white. West, black south, yellow. At the center of the world grew the mighty ceiba, the world tree. Its deep roots reached into the underworld, and its branches stretched high into the heavens, linking all three realms of existence. Beneath the earth lay the underworld, Xibalba, the place of fright, or the place of dissolution. It consisted of 9 shadowy levels, home to the lords of death, and a realm of trials for the souls of the dead. Entrances to Xibalba were often associated with caves and natural sinkholes, the sacred cenotes. The Maya believed in the cyclic nature of time, that the world had already been created and destroyed several times. According to their reckoning, the current era began in 3114 BCE. Rituals and sacrifices. Rituals were an essential bridge between humans and the gods, maintaining cosmic order and ensuring the well-being of the community. They included prayers, fasting, abstinence, ritual purification in steam baths, masked dances portraying gods or animals, theatrical performances, and music played on drums, flutes, trumpets, and rattles. Offerings to the gods included food, corn tortillas, drinks made of maize flour, cacao, honey, tobacco, incense of copal resin, as well as precious objects, jade, feathers, shells, fine textiles, bloodletting. One of the most sacred rites was bloodletting, practiced by rulers, their wives, nobles, and even commoners. Kings, queens, and other elites pierced their tongues, ears, lips, or other parts of the body with sharp objects. Stingray spines, obsidian blades, flint knives, bone needles, letting the blood soak into strips of bark paper or cloth that were then burned. The rising smoke carried the life essence of their blood to the gods. Through this act, they believed they could enter visionary states and communicate directly with ancestors and deities. Blood was regarded as a sacred substance, the vessel of vital force. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice, the feeding of the gods, was also practiced, though likely not on the same scale as among the Aztecs. The victims were most often captured enemy nobles, but at times slaves or even children were offered, especially in water and rain-related rituals or at the dedication of new temples. The methods of sacrifice varied. Heart extraction, a custom that grew stronger under Central Mexican influence. Beheading, ritual drowning in sacred wells, execution by arrows against a bound victim, throwing the victim from the top of a pyramid. Sacrifices were performed to appease the gods, secure good harvests, consecrate new buildings, mark a ruler's accession, celebrate victory in war, or close major calendar cycles. The sacred ball game. The Maya ball game also held profound ritual meaning, symbolizing the cosmic struggle of opposing forces. At times, the losing team, or even the victorious one as the highest honor, was sacrificed, often by decapitation. Funerary rites and the cult of ancestors. The Maya believed in an afterlife where the soul continued its journey beyond death. Burial customs depended greatly on social status. Rulers and nobles were laid to rest in specially built tombs, often beneath pyramids, within palaces, or on raised burial platforms. Their graves were richly furnished with jade ornaments, especially funerary masks, covering the face of the deceased, painted pottery filled with food and drink for the journey to the other world, weapons, insignia of power, and at times sacrificed attendants or even family members. Bodies were often covered with red paint, a sacred symbol of blood and life itself. Notable examples include the tomb of Pakal in Palong, and the royal tombs discovered in Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul. Common people were usually buried beneath the floors of their homes or nearby, accompanied by only a modest set of grave goods, a few clay vessels and personal belongings. Ancestor veneration held great importance. The Maya believed that the spirits of their forebears, especially deified rulers, could influence the lives of the living, offering protection, or, if angered, bringing misfortune. To honor them, families presented offerings and sought their guidance through sacred rituals. Shamanism and communication with spirits were deeply rooted in Maya religion. Priests, healers, and diviners entered altered states of consciousness through ritual dances, music, fasting, bloodletting, or the use of sacred psychoactive plants, such as certain species of mushrooms or tobacco. These practices were believed to open pathways to the spiritual realm, allowing them to travel to the heavens or the underworld, heal the sick by driving away evil spirits, or foresee the future. The Maya also believed in spirit companions, often in the form of animals, who shared a person's soul and could cross into other worlds. The jaguar, with its power to see in darkness and move silently between realms, became a potent symbol of kingship and spiritual authority. Chapter 3, Twilight of the Gods. The mystery of the classic Maya collapse around AD 800-950. After centuries of extraordinary cultural brilliance, the civilization of the Maya in the southern lowlands, the regions of modern-day Guatemala, Belize, parts of Campeche, Quintana, Peru, Chiapas, and Honduras, entered a deep and prolonged crisis. Historians and archaeologists call this era the classic Maya collapse. It was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow and relentless decline that unfolded over 100 to 150 years, roughly from AD 760 to 910. Its consequences, however, were catastrophic. Signs of the decline included the abrupt halt of grand construction projects. Monumental pyramids, palaces, and temples, once the pride of the Maya cities, were no longer built. The carving of stone stelae, which had recorded dynastic histories and sacred rituals for centuries, nearly ceased. The last dated monuments in various cities belong to the early 10th century. For example, AD 869 in Tikal, AD 889 in Huaxactun, and around AD 909 in Tonina, the silence of the stelae. marked the end of historical record-keeping and the ceremonial life that sustained their sacred kings. Once thriving cities, some home to 60,000, 90,000 people at their peak, like Tikal, became deserted, their plazas and temples slowly swallowed by the encroaching jungle. Populations dwindled as people died or migrated to other regions. Craftsmanship declined. The production of finely painted ceramics and jade ornaments diminished in both quality and quantity. The political system of divine kingship weakened. Royal dynasties faltered. Hierarchies crumbled. And the complex social order dissolved. Theories behind the collapse. To this day, there is no single universally accepted explanation. Most scholars agree it was the outcome of a complex interplay of interconnected factors, leading to a systemic breakdown. One key theory is ecological stress and resource exhaustion. During the late Classic period, AD 600 to 800, the population of the southern lowlands may have grown so dense that it surpassed the land's ability to sustain it with the agricultural technology available at the time. Ecological strain and the burden on the land soil exhaustion. Centuries of slash and burn agriculture gradually stripped away the fertile topsoil, especially on slopes, and shortened the natural fallow periods needed for the earth to recover. This led to steadily declining crop yields. Deforestation. Vast forests were cleared to open new maize fields, to build wooden frameworks for construction, and to supply fuel, especially for burning the enormous amounts of limestone required to make plaster and mortar for their massive pyramids and temples. The loss of tree cover likely altered the local climate, reducing rainfall, raising temperatures, intensifying both droughts and floods, and reducing the biodiversity of plants and animals. Archaeologists estimate that the lime needed to coat even a single mid-sized pyramid required burning huge quantities of timber. Climate change and the great droughts. Paleoclimate studies, including analyses of lake sediments, stalagmite layers in caves, and tree ring data, reveal a series of severe, prolonged droughts that struck the Maya region, especially between AD 800 and 930. These were not isolated events, but recurrent and intensifying dry periods. Because many southern lowland cities lacked large rivers or lakes, they depended heavily on collecting rainwater in reservoirs and natural sinkholes. Extended droughts could therefore bring disastrous crop failures, famine, drinking water shortages, and civil unrest. Such crises may have undermined public faith in the kings and priests, whose authority rested on their perceived ability to bring rain and ensure good harvests through sacred rituals. Warfare and political turmoil. The military hypothesis. During the late Classic period, 6th, 8th centuries, warfare between city-states intensified. Conflicts became more destructive, aimed not only at capturing prisoners for sacrifice, but also at destroying rival centers and seizing their territories. Competition for land, water, trade routes, and political dominance, as well as the ambitions of ruling dynasties, drained the strength of kingdoms. Famous examples include the long rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul, and wars among Dos Pilas, Aguateca, and Sebal. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from this period frequently describe battles, the taking of captives, and the destruction of enemy cities. Archaeological evidence points to the construction of defensive fortifications around some cities, such as Dos Pilas, Aguateca, and Becan, suggesting a climate of fear and escalating conflict. The growing power of the military likely diverted both human and material resources away from agriculture and trade, further straining the fragile economy. Social upheaval. The internal revolt hypothesis. Mounting inequality between the elite and the common people. The heavy burden of taxes, tribute, and forced labor combined with the inability of the rulers to solve economic and ecological crises may have led to internal unrest and peasant uprisings. Some archaeological signs, such as hastily built fortifications around city centers, traces of deliberate destruction of palaces and temples, and the defacement of monuments, can be interpreted as evidence of civil strife and the decline of royal authority. However, the direct proof of large-scale revolts remains limited, and this hypothesis is still debated among scholars. Economic disruption and shifting trade routes. The collapse of other great centers of ancient Mesoamerica. For instance, the decline of Teotihuacan around AD 600, 700, though earlier, may have had long-term ripple effects on regional trade networks and political stability. Shifts in trade patterns, such as the growing importance of coastal maritime routes that bypassed interior lowland cities, could have undermined the economies of inland Maya centers that depended on long-distance exchange of valuable goods like obsidian from Teotihuacan. Disease. Although harder to trace archaeologically, some researchers consider epidemics another possible factor contributing to population decline and social destabilization during the collapse. Epidemics and public health. Although direct evidence is scarce, skeletal remains rarely preserve signs of infectious diseases. The high population density in urban centers, deteriorating sanitation, and shortages of food and clean water during times of crisis could have promoted the spread of epidemic illnesses. Such outbreaks might have caused a sharp decline in population, though this remains a hypothesis rather than a firmly established fact for the classic period. Unlike the well-documented epidemics that followed the Spanish conquest centuries later, crisis of faith and ideology, the inability of the kings and priests to prevent droughts, famine, or military defeats through their traditional rituals likely led to a loss of confidence in the old religious system. The very ideology that legitimized the authority of the elite. This crisis of belief may have prompted people to abandon ancient rituals, cease the construction of new monuments, and withdraw their support from the ruling class. Regional patterns of decline. It is important to note that the collapse was neither universal nor simultaneous across the entire Maya world. The earliest and most severe declines, in the late 8th and early 9th centuries AD, struck the cities of the western lowlands along the Usumacinta River, such as Palenque, Yaxchilan, and Piedras Negras. Later, during the mid-9th century, the crisis spread to the central southern lowlands, Petén, Tikal, Calakmul, Huaxactún, and Naranjo, and finally reached the southeastern cities, such as Copan and Quirigua, toward the end of the century. At the same time, northern Yucatan cities, the so-called Puuc-style centers, such as Uxmal, Caba, Sayil, and Labna, were flourishing during the 9th and early 10th centuries, even as the southern cities declined. Eventually, however, these northern cities also fell into decline by the late 10th to early 11th centuries. Some centers in Belize, for example, Lamanai, Altunja, and Caracol, although affected by the broader crisis, survived longer, and in some cases even thrived or experienced revivals during this transitional period. A civilization transformed, not erased. The collapse did not mean the total disappearance of the Maya people or their culture. Rather, it brought about a dramatic depopulation, in some regions up to 90% or more, and the abandonment of once great cities, along with the breakdown of the old political and social order of the divine kings. Yet the Maya endured. Cultural and political centers shifted northward to the Yucatan Peninsula, where new powerful cities arose, most notably Chichen Itza, and into the highlands of Guatemala, where new kingdoms emerged among the Quiche, Cachiquel, and other Maya groups. These surviving communities adapted to new conditions, creating new social structures and cultural traditions. A lasting mystery and a timeless lesson, the mystery of the Maya collapse continues to fascinate scholars. It stands as a vivid example of how a complex civilization can be rendered vulnerable by a combination of internal and external pressures, and serves as a reminder of the importance of wise interaction with the environment and the resilience of social systems. Chapter 4. New Horizons. The Post-Classic Era. C. A.D. 950. 1521. With the decline of the great southern classic centers, Maya history did not end. Instead, a new chapter began. The post-classic period, marked by the shift of civilization, heartlands to the north, the Yucatan Peninsula, and to the highlands of Guatemala. This era was characterized by fresh cultural influences, especially from central Mexico, and by changes in political organization, religion, art, and economy, including the rise of maritime trade. Scholars divide the post-classic into two main phases. The early post-classic, approximately AD 950, 1200, 1250, and the late post-classic, approximately AD 1200, 1250, 1500, 1521, the decades just before the Spanish arrival. The rise of the North, Chichen Itza, and Toltec influence. The most striking phenomenon of the early post-classic was the meteoric rise of Chichen Itza, the mouth of the well of the Itza in the northern Yucatan. This city, which already existed in earlier times and still bore the architectural roots of the classic period, the so-called Old Chichen, transformed in the 10th or 11th centuries into a powerful capital whose influence stretched across much of the Yucatan Peninsula. The architecture and art of Chichen Itza clearly reveal the presence of Toltec influence, a warlike people from central Mexico, whose capital was the city of Tula. This connection was likely tied to the migration of Maya groups who had come under Toltec influence. The Itza people, led by the legendary ruler Kukulkan, whose name means feathered serpent, or perhaps even to a brief but direct military presence of the Toltecs themselves. This influence is especially evident in the cult of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, closely resembling the Toltec worship of Quetzalcoatl. The most iconic monument is the Temple of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo. The pyramid has 9 terraces and 4 stairways. Altogether, the 365 steps symbolize the solar year. The pyramid was built so that, during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the interplay of light and shadow creates the striking illusion of a giant serpent slithering down the northern balustrade. Other architectural features include long colonnades and vast halls, with rows of square columns carved with reliefs of warriors, such as the Temple of the Warriors and the adjacent group of 1,000 columns. Depictions of eagle warriors and jaguar warriors, typical of Toltec military orders, adorn the walls. Among the most distinctive sculptures are the Jacmul figures, reclining stone statues with their heads turned at a right angle, and a bowl placed on the abdomen for offerings. most likely human hearts. These figures are found both in Tula and Chichen Itza. There are also tzompantli, or skull racks, platforms decorated with carved skulls, where the skulls of sacrificial victims were once displayed. War-related imagery dominates the art. Warriors, battle scenes, and depictions of human sacrifice, especially the dramatic ritual of extracting the heart. Chichen Itza became a true cultural crossroads, where the traditions of the classic Maya, such as the Puug-style architecture seen in some structures, fused with Central Mexican elements, creating a new hybrid and distinctly more militaristic style. Another important feature was the sacred cenote, a vast natural limestone sinkhole about 60 meters across and 20 meters deep to the water as surface. It served as a site of offerings to Jack, the rain god, and other deities. In the early 20th century, the archaeologist Edward Thompson dredged the cenote and recovered numerous artifacts. Objects of gold, copper, jade, obsidian, pottery, textiles, wooden items, and human remains, primarily of children and young men. There was also the famous caracol, the snail, an observatory. This round building with a tower had windows aligned with key celestial events, such as the extreme rising and setting points of the planet Venus, reflecting the continuity of Maya astronomical traditions. Chichen Itza also boasted the largest ball court in all of ancient Mesoamerica, measuring about 168 meters long and 70 meters wide, with the tall vertical walls and stone rings carved with entwined serpents. Reliefs on the walls depict the sacred ball game and the ritual beheading of one of the players, a dramatic testament to the fusion of sport, ritual, and sacrifice. The city was a major political, religious, and trading hub, controlling salt production along the northern coast of the Yucatan and maritime trade routes across the Caribbean. Its dominance lasted until roughly the mid-10th century. In the late post-classic period, around 1200-1250 CE, Chichen Itza declined for reasons still unclear, possibly due to internal strife, resource exhaustion, or defeat by a rising rival power. Leadership on the Yucatan passed to the city of Mayapan, the banner of the Maya, said by legend to have been founded either by Kukulkan himself or by his followers. Mayapan flourished roughly between 1250 and 1450 CE, becoming the new center of Maya political life on the peninsula. Mayapan became the capital of a political alliance of the Yucatan city-states, the so-called League of Mayapan, though its true nature is still debated by scholars. The League was dominated by the ruling Kokam dynasty. Noble families from other regions, such as the Xiu, Chel, and Kupu lineages, were compelled to reside in Mayapan as hostages or as representatives of their provinces. The architecture of Mayapan was far less grand and refined than that of Chichen Itza or the great classic period cities. There was less stonework and more plaster and timber. The masonry was rougher. This perhaps reflected changes in society, a stronger centralization of power, and the decline of certain artisanal traditions. The city was densely built, with about 4,000 structures spread over 4 kilometers, and it was surrounded by a defensive wall, roughly 9 kilometers long. Its main pyramid was a scaled-down replica of El Castillo of Chichen Itza. The rule of Mayapan and the Kokom dynasty, which some sources describe as harsh and reliant on mercenaries from central Mexico, ended in an uprising of the subordinate cities, led by the Xiu lineage of Uxmal, around 1441-1461 CE. Mayapan was sacked, looted, and abandoned by its inhabitants. After the fall of Mayapan, the Yucatan fractured into 16 to 18 small, often rival chiefdoms, such as Mani, ruled by the Xiu, Sotuta, Kokam, Chetumal, Cochua, Kupul, Canul, and others. It was in this politically fragmented state that the Maya of the peninsula encountered the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century. Other late-period centers, the eastern coast of Yucatan, the Caribbean coast of the peninsula, saw the rise of prosperous maritime trading cities that linked the Gulf of Mexico with the shores of Honduras. Tulum, whose ancient name was Zama, meaning dawn, was a small but well-fortified port city, perched dramatically on a cliff above the Caribbean Sea. It was renowned for its defensive wall and for the Temple of the Frescoes, decorated with vivid murals in a style reminiscent of the Mixtec painters of Puebla in central Mexico. Xcaret, whose ancient name was Pol, was another important port and trading hub. Cozumel, known in antiquity as Cuzumil, the place of swallows, was both a major commercial center and a revered site of pilgrimage to the sanctuary of the goddess Ixchel, patroness of fertility and childbirth. The highland kingdoms of Guatemala. In the highlands of present-day Guatemala, after the decline of the great classic period cities, power became consolidated into strong kingdoms ruled by various Maya peoples. The Quiche with their capital at Cumarcash, Utatlan, the Cachical centered at Iximche, the Tzutujil based at Chiutinamit near Lake Atitlan, the Mam, Pocomam, and others. These highland kingdoms retained many classic-era traditions, the sacred calendar, hieroglyphic writing, and the ancient pantheon of gods. Yet they also absorbed Central Mexican influences, including the feathered serpent cult and new military tactics. Much of their history is known thanks to surviving indigenous chronicles, such as the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche, written down in Latin script during the colonial period, the annals of the Cachical, as well as the title of Totonicapán, and records from Solola. These kingdoms frequently fought one another for dominance and control of resources. Cultural and religious shifts of the late period, traditional deities such as Jac, the rain god, Itzamna, and the maize gods continued to be worshipped. But the cult of Kukulkan became especially prominent in the Yucatan. Under the influence of Central Mexican religion, the practice of human sacrifice appears to have become more frequent and varied. Most notably, the ritual extraction of the heart. New deities or new aspects of older gods also emerged, including Ekchua, the patron of merchants and cacao, and Ixtab, the goddess of suicide. In art and architecture, these shifting beliefs and outside influences left a lasting imprint, reflecting a Maya world that, while transformed, still held firmly to many of its ancestral traditions. On the Yucatan Peninsula, one can observe a fusion of Maya and Toltec styles. In general, there was less emphasis on the grandeur and refinement of stone carving than during the Classic period, and greater attention to fortifications, such as the defensive walls of Mayapan and Tulum. In the arts, military themes became more common. Depictions of death, processions of warriors, and battle scenes spread to murals, painted in a style reminiscent of the Mixtec and Puebla traditions of central Mexico. Writing the Maya hieroglyphic script continued to be used, especially in handwritten codices. All four surviving Maya books date from this late post-classic period. Stone inscriptions, however, became far fewer, shorter, and simpler compared to the classic era. Trade grew dramatically. The Maya navigated the Caribbean coast in large dugout canoes, some 15-20 meters long, capable of carrying up to 25 paddlers and several tons of cargo, making long-distance sea voyages possible. Trade routes connected Yucatan with Honduras, the Gulf Coast of Tabasco, and perhaps even the Caribbean islands and parts of Central America. They traded salt, honey, beeswax, cotton, and textiles. Brightly dyed feathers, slaves, cacao, obsidian, flint, and ceramic wares. Metalworking. In the late period, the Maya began using metals: gold, copper alloys, silver, and bronze, primarily for ornaments, rings, earrings, pendants, diadems, ritual objects, small bells, masks, and some tools such as fishhooks, needles, tweezers, and small axes. Stone, however, remained the main material for weapons and agricultural tools. The metalworking techniques, including forging, lost wax casting, delicate wire work, and gilding, were likely introduced from South America through Central America. This late period was a time of rapid change, adaptation to new conditions, growing external influences, and internal conflicts, all of which prepared the ground for the next tragic chapter in Maya history, the clash with European civilization. Chapter 5. A Time of Trials. The Spanish Conquest, the Colonial Era, and Maya Resistance. At the dawn of the 16th century, European ships appeared on the horizon of Maya lands, the harbingers of a new and formidable force that would forever transform their world. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors opened one of the most dramatic and tragic chapters in the history of the Maya people. First contacts and the conquest of Yucatan. The first recorded contact between the Maya of Yucatan and the Spanish occurred in 1502, during Christopher Columbus's fourth voyage, when he encountered a Maya trading canoe off the coast of Honduras. In 1511, a Spanish shipwreck off the Yucatan coast left two survivors, Geronimo de Aguilar and Gonzalo Guerrero, who became captives of the Maya. Aguilar later escaped and served as an interpreter for Hernán Cortés, while Guerrero fully embraced Maya culture, married the daughter of a local chief, and even fought against the Spanish alongside his adopted people. Further encounters came with the expeditions of Francisco Hernández de Córdoba, 1517, and Juan de Grijalva, 1518, which explored the Yucatan coast and led to the first armed clashes with the Maya. These early contacts revealed to the Spaniards that the inhabitants of these lands were not primitive savages, but an organized, warlike people living in stone-built cities. A systematic conquest of the Yucatan began in 1527 under Francisco de Montejo the Elder, who was granted the title of Adelantado by the Spanish crown and the right to subdue the peninsula. However, the conquest of Yucatan proved to be an extraordinarily difficult and drawn-out struggle, lasting 2 decades, 1527 to 1547, with several interruptions. The main reason was the political fragmentation of the Maya, who lacked a single centralized kingdom that could be subdued in one decisive blow. Like the conquest of the Aztec Empire by Cortés, the Spaniards had to subdue each of the 16 to 17 independent Maya provinces separately. The Maya fought with fierce determination, defending their homeland with deep knowledge of the terrain, ambush tactics, and large-scale uprisings. They were skilled warriors, armed with bows and arrows, spears, slings, and darts. The Yucatan itself was an unforgiving battlefield. A hot, humid climate, scarce fresh water, found only in the deep limestone wells called cenotes, dense, nearly impassable jungles, and tropical diseases against which the Spaniards had no immunity. Supply lines were long and fragile. The conquistadors' forces were small in number, and provisions had to be brought from distant bases in Mexico. Step by step, Francisco de Montejo the Elder, his son Francisco de Montejo the Younger, and their nephew pushed deeper into the peninsula. They founded the city of Salamanca de Campeche in 1540, Mérida on the site of the ancient city of Tuho in 1542, and Valladolid on the ruins of Sachi in 1543, each new town carved out amid resistance. A decisive factor in weakening the Maya was their own internal strife. Long-standing feuds, such as that between the ruling houses of the Shu of Mani and the Kokoms of Sotuta, proved pivotal. The Shu allied themselves with the Spaniards, a move that greatly hastened the conquest. Even after the Spanish formally subdued most of Yucatan, rebellions continued to flare. A major uprising broke out in 1546 to 1547 in the eastern and southern provinces, only to be crushed with brutal reprisals. Organized resistance across much of Yucatan was finally broken by 1547, the conquest of the highland Maya kingdoms, Guatemala, and the highlands of Guatemala, the conquest of the Maya states. The Quiche, the Cachical, the Tzutujil, and others was led by Pedro de Alvarado, one of Cortez's most ambitious and ruthless lieutenants, nicknamed Tonatiuh, the Sun, for his red beard. Alvarado employed the same tactics that had succeeded in Mexico, exploiting rivalries among native peoples, forging alliances with some to destroy others. At first, the Cachical aided him against their traditional enemies, the Quiche, but after a series of bloody battles, most notably the Battle of Celaju, modern Quetzaltenango, where legend says the last great Quiche's leader, Tekun Uman, fell. Both the Quiche and later the Cachical saw their capitals destroyed. Cumarcaj, the Quiche's capital, was burned by Alvarado. Iximche, the Cachical capital, suffered the same fate after they rebelled against Spanish demands. The highland kingdoms were subjugated, though pockets of resistance lingered for years. Political independence, however, was lost forever. Tayasal, the last stronghold of Maya independence. Not all Maya realms fell in the 16th century. The Itza Maya, descendants of Chichen Itza's former inhabitants, had migrated to the Piton region of northern Guatemala and built a new capital, Nojpeten, the Great Island, later known as Tayasal. This island city, protected by the surrounding lake and dense jungle, remained independent for more than 150 years. It became a sanctuary for refugees from conquered Maya territories and the last bastion of pre-Columbian Maya civilization. The Spaniards made several attempts to subdue it, including peaceful Franciscan missions, but all failed. Only in 1697, after long preparations, did a Spanish expedition under Martín de Ursúa y Arizmendi storm Tayasal, bringing an end to the last free Maya kingdom. Its fall marked the final subjugation of all significant Maya groups to the Spanish crown. Consequences of the conquest: demographic collapse and cultural destruction. The conquest brought catastrophic, far-reaching, and long-lasting consequences for the Maya. Their population plummeted due to war, battlefield casualties, mass executions during the suppression of uprisings, and, most devastatingly, the invisible enemy brought from across the ocean. Old world diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, plague, diphtheria. Epidemics swept through a people with no immunity, killing an estimated 75 to 90% of the Maya population within the first decades and centuries after contact. It was one of the greatest demographic disasters in human history. Forced labor and exploitation. Spanish rule imposed brutal systems of exploitation under the encomienda, a system where indigenous people were nominally entrusted to Spanish settlers for conversion to Christianity, but were in practice enslaved. Thousands were forced to toil in plantations of sugarcane and indigo, in mines outside their homelands, and on the construction of colonial towns and churches. The repartimiento, another form of forced seasonal labor, further drained their communities. This relentless labor, combined with disease and loss of land, devastated their health, fractured their families, and destroyed their traditional way of life. Famine, displacement, and psychological toll. The seizure of farmlands and the disruption of traditional agriculture often led to crop failures and famine. Men were torn from their villages for forced labor, leaving fields untended. The horrors of war, the loss of their world, and the hopelessness of subjugation took a profound psychological toll, lowering birth rates and increasing mortality. Cultural erasure, ethnocide. Spanish missionaries, primarily Franciscans and Dominicans, waged a zealous campaign against what they saw as pagan idolatry. Temples and sacred statues were destroyed. Churches were built over them, or with their stones. In July 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa of Yucatan, author of the valuable yet contradictory Relación de las Cosas de Yucatan, which described Maya calendar, writing, and customs from a Catholic's viewpoint, organized the infamous public burning in the town of Mani. Hundreds of Maya manuscripts and thousands of idols and ritual objects were burned. Landa wrote, "We found a large number of their books with these characters of theirs, and since there was nothing in them that did not contain superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all, at which they grieved amazingly, and which caused them much affliction. This was an irreparable loss to world culture, as an immense trove of Maya knowledge was destroyed. Traditional rituals, festivals, names, clothing, and the Maya language itself were banned or suppressed, replaced by Spanish language, Catholicism, and European customs. The traditional educational systems for priests and scribes vanished, and the political order of independent city-states was dismantled. Spanish land laws declared the crown the supreme owner of all lands, confiscating the best farmlands from Maya communities and integrating them into the colonial economy as a subjugated, taxed, and exploited caste. Survival, resistance, and adaptation, despite the brutality of the conquest, the catastrophic decline in population, and the destruction of their sacred traditions. The Maya did not disappear as a people. They resisted in uprisings, preserved elements of their language and customs in secret, and adapted to survive under colonial rule. Their resistance continued throughout the entire colonial period, and even later taking various forms. Armed uprisings, both large and small, broke out periodically in Yucatan, Chiapas, and Guatemala. Examples include the uprising in Satuta and Cachuaha in 1546 to 1547, the Canton Rebellion in 1761 in Yucatan, and the uprising of the Tzeltal people in Chiapas in 1712. The most famous and prolonged was the Caste War of Yucatan, 1847 to 1901, a large-scale Maya revolt against the Mexican government, which was dominated by descendants of Spaniards and mestizos. The rebellion was fueled by brutal exploitation, land dispossession, racial discrimination, and oppressive taxation. The Maya, who called themselves the People of the Cross, established their own independent state. John Santa Cruz, Little Holy Cross, House of the Jaguar, with its capital in the city of the same name, now known as Felipe Carrillo Puerto. At the heart of their ideology was a syncretic religion of the talking cross, which gave them guidance and prophecies. The war was extremely bloody and led to the devastation of much of the Yucatan. Although the Mexican government managed by the early 20th century to suppress the main centers of resistance, John Santa Cruz maintained de facto independence until 1901, and sporadic clashes continued even afterward. Many Maya communities fled to remote, hard-to-reach regions. For example, the Lacandon in Chiapas and the Mopan and Itza in Petén retreated deep into the jungles to escape Spanish control and preserve their traditional way of life. There was also passive resistance, maintaining their languages in everyday life, secretly observing traditional rituals and beliefs, passing down knowledge and myths orally, refusing to comply with colonial authorities' demands, feigning misunderstanding, appealing to laws, and submitting complaints and petitions to colonial officials about the abuses of administrators and landowners. Although such efforts rarely brought success, cultural blending, syncretism, became one of the most important mechanisms of adaptation and cultural preservation. This blending combined elements of Catholicism with the traditional beliefs and rituals of the Maya. Many Christian saints became identified with ancient deities. For example, the Virgin Mary was associated with the moon goddess Ixchel, or with Mother Earth, while St. James was linked to the god of thunder. Ceremonies such as baptisms, mass, and saint festivals took on a mixed character, incorporating elements of ancient practices, offerings, dances, music, the use of resin and copal incense. This religious syncretism remains characteristic of many Maya communities to this day. Colonial legacy. The colonial period, which lasted about 300 years, left a deep and indelible mark on the life of the Maya. It brought immeasurable suffering, immense cultural and demographic losses, yet it did not succeed in fully destroying the unique culture and resilient spirit of this people. The Maya managed to adapt to new conditions, preserve their identity, albeit in a transformed, mixed form, and pass it on to future generations. This period also shaped many of the problems that modern Maya still face today, such as land disputes, poverty, and discrimination. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Millennia and the Modern Maya. The history of the Maya does not end with the colonial era or the wars of independence of Latin American countries in the 19th century. Today, in the 21st century, millions of descendants of the ancient builders of pyramids and creators of a sophisticated calendar continue to live on the lands of their ancestors, preserving their unique culture, languages, and traditions, and striving for their future in a complex and rapidly changing world. Who are the modern Maya? The modern Maya are not a single, monolithic people, but rather a large group of related indigenous nations, speaking more than 30 different, yet genetically related languages belonging to the Mayan language family. The largest groups include, in Mexico, the Yucatec Maya on the Yucatan Peninsula, the Tzeltal and Tzotzil in Chiapas, the Chol, Tojolabal, Quanjobal, and Mam peoples. In Guatemala, where the Maya make up about 40-50% of the population, the main groups are Ke, Iche, Quiche, Kakchikal, Quechua, Mam, Quanjobal, Pocomam, Tz'utujil, Ixil, and Achi. In Belize, the Yucatec Maya, Mopan, and Quechua, along with the smaller communities in Honduras and El Salvador. The total population of the modern Maya is estimated at 6.8 million people, and by some estimates up to 10 million. They still inhabit the same regions where their ancient civilization once flourished, maintaining their cultural traditions and identity despite centuries of colonial domination, forced cultural assimilation, and modernization. Many Maya communities have managed to preserve and continue to develop important elements of their traditional culture. Language. Mayan languages remain alive and vibrant. They are spoken within families and communities and are sometimes used in local education, radio broadcasting, and literature. Efforts are being made to develop standardized writing systems and educational materials. Traditional clothing. In many regions, women, and sometimes men, especially the elderly or during festivals, continue to wear traditional garments. Particularly notable are the women's embroidered blouses, huipil, and corte skirts. The patterns, colors, and weaving techniques often have deep symbolic meanings, reflecting worldviews and indicating affiliation with specific communities or regions. Handicrafts. Traditional crafts continue to thrive and are often passed down from generation to generation. Weaving, especially on backstrap looms or on pedal looms, introduced by the Spanish. Pottery, preserving ancient forms and techniques. Embroidery, basketry, using palm leaves or agave fibers for baskets, mats, and hats. Wood carving, masks, figurines. Jewelry making, often using silver and amber, notably in Chiapas. These products are often sold to tourists, providing a source of income, but they are also used in daily life and in rituals. Belief system and rituals. Religious syncretism remains a defining feature of Maya culture, alongside Catholicism and, in some regions, the growing influence of Protestantism. There persist many elements of ancient beliefs. The veneration of natural forces, Mother Earth, the spirits of mountains, caves, springs, and forests, the honoring of ancestors, and rituals tied to the agricultural cycle, such as planting and harvesting maize, as well as to the cycle of life, birth, marriage, and death. Traditional healers and ritual specialists still play an important role in many communities. On the Yucatan Peninsula, they are called Amen, while in Guatemala they are known as Aki, or day keepers. These spiritual leaders use the sacred ritual calendar to conduct ceremonies, perform divinations, and carry out healing rites. The ritual calendar is still used in some communities, especially in Guatemala, to make predictions and determine auspicious days for various activities, community organization. In many villages, traditional forms of self-governance are preserved. For example, there is a rotating system of communal offices that men of the community serve in turn, as well as a tradition of communal landholding, although it is often under threat. Traditional medicine. The use of medicinal plants and healing rituals remains an important part of community life. Cuisine. The traditional Maya cuisine, based on the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, as well as chili peppers, tomatoes, and avocados, continues to be central to their diet. Staple foods include corn tortillas, the classic tamales, a dish of corn dough filled with various ingredients, and traditional corn-based drinks, such as atole. Oral tradition. Myths, legends, folktales, and songs are still passed down orally from generation to generation, preserving cultural identity and history. Challenges in the modern world life for the modern Maya is far from ideal. They face numerous social, economic, political, and cultural challenges. poverty, and economic inequality. Many Maya communities live in extreme poverty, lacking adequate access to quality education, healthcare, clean water, and basic infrastructure. There is a high level of unemployment, low income from agriculture, and frequent land disputes. The struggle for land, much of which was taken from indigenous communities during the colonial period and later, continues to this day. These disputes often lead to conflicts with large landowners, agribusiness corporations, mining companies, and the state. Discrimination and racism. The Maya often face prejudice based on language, culture, and ethnicity within the dominant Spanish-speaking society. This discrimination affects their access to education, employment, justice, and is evident in everyday interactions. Cultural and linguistic loss. Under the pressures of globalization, urban migration, modern mass media, television, the internet, Spanish language education, and the spread of non-traditional religions, there is increasing cultural erosion. Younger generations are often turning away from traditional customs and losing fluency in their native Mayan languages. Environmental issues, deforestation to create pasture land, expand plantations, and for illegal logging, along with pollution from waste and chemicals and the effects of climate change, pose serious threats. Droughts and hurricanes endanger the traditional Maya way of life, which remains closely tied to nature and agriculture. Political persecution and violence in some countries, especially Guatemala. During the Civil War from 1960 to 1996, the Maya suffered massive repression, forced relocations, torture, and mass killings at the hands of state security forces. The tragedy of the Guatemalan Maya gained international attention. The Zapatista uprising in Chiapas, Mexico, which began in 1994, was also largely a movement of the indigenous Maya peoples, demanding land rights, self-governance, and improved social and economic conditions. Maya resistance and cultural revival. Despite all these hardships, the modern Maya are not passive victims. They continue to struggle for their rights, work toward cultural revival, and strive to preserve their heritage, identity, and connection to the land. They actively continue to fight for their rights, for the preservation of their cultural identity, and for a dignified place in the modern world. Beginning in the second half of the 20th century, there has been a notable rise in Maya self-awareness and political activism, giving birth to what became known as the Maya movement. Numerous community organizations, associations, and cooperatives have emerged to defend their interests at the local, national, and international levels. They demand recognition and respect for their cultural rights, languages, and traditions, the right to their lands and natural resources, political self-governance, better social and economic conditions, an end to discrimination and violence, and justice for past atrocities. A significant process of cultural revival is underway. The study and teaching of native languages in schools and universities, the creation of bilingual education programs, the recording and publishing of oral folklore, myths, and histories, the development of modern literature, poetry, prose, drama, and art forms such as painting, sculpture, and music in the Maya languages. Inspired by traditional heritage, there is also a growing awareness of the ancient Maya civilization, strengthening among the Maya themselves a sense of pride in their heritage, as well as demands for respect and protection of sacred sites and archaeological monuments, with active involvement in their management and preservation. Traditional forms of medicine, agriculture, and spiritual practices are being revived and adapted to modern conditions. A landmark moment in the recognition of indigenous contributions to the struggle for peace and human rights came in 1992 when Rigoberta Menchú, an activist of the Quiché Maya people from Guatemala, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to defend indigenous rights and to expose atrocities committed during the Guatemalan Civil War. Archaeological heritage and its significance. The ruins of ancient Maya cities, such as Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Calakmul, Yaxchilan, Bonampak, and hundreds of others, are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites and are invaluable treasures of humanity. They attract millions of tourists and researchers from around the world, contributing significantly to the regional economies. Archaeological excavations, conservation efforts, studies of ancient inscriptions, and the decipherment of Maya glyphs continue to this day, yielding new and remarkable discoveries that deepen our understanding of this great and complex civilization. The decipherment of Maya writing, in particular, revolutionized our knowledge, granting access to their own accounts of their history, mythology, and scientific achievements. This heritage holds profound importance, not only for global science and tourism, but also for the modern Maya themselves. Serving as a source of cultural pride and identity, it stands as a source of national pride, a symbol of cultural continuity, and a powerful instrument in the struggle for recognition and rights. For many Maya, these ancient cities are not merely ruins, but sacred places, deeply connected to their ancestors and spiritual world. Conclusion. Lessons of the Maya civilization. The Maya civilization is not simply a chapter in a history book or a collection of exotic ruins hidden in the jungle. It is a living testimony to the extraordinary creative potential of humankind. Our ability to build complex social systems, develop sophisticated philosophies and worldviews, create stunning works of art, and achieve advanced scientific knowledge under diverse and often challenging conditions. Without the technologies we now take for granted, the story of the Maya, their rise and their fall, teaches us profound lessons about the genius of the human mind, capable of making remarkable discoveries in mathematics, such as the concept of zero and the positional number system, about their precise astronomical observations, accurate calendars, predictions of eclipses, and the invention of the only fully developed writing system in pre-Columbian America. Their architecture gave rise to grand cities, distinctive vault designs, and artistic masterpieces, but it also serves as a reminder of the fragility of even the most advanced and seemingly stable civilizations in the face of ecological challenges, resource depletion, climate change, internal conflicts, wars, social inequality, and the failure to adapt to changing conditions. The collapse of the classic Maya stands as a stern warning about the consequences of unsustainable development and the loss of balance between society and nature. At the same time, their story reveals the remarkable resilience of the human spirit and culture, the ability to survive, adapt, and preserve identity, even under the harshest conditions of conquest, repression, and discrimination. The fate of the Maya after the Spanish conquest, and their current struggle for their rights and cultural revival, is a vivid testament to the importance of respecting cultural diversity and recognizing the fragility of cultural heritage. The destruction of Maya codices by Spanish missionaries was a tragedy not only for the Maya, but for all humankind, depriving us of priceless knowledge Yet the story does not end there. The descendants of the ancient Maya live on today, carrying a unique culture and continuing to fight for their rightful place in the world. Their past and present are deeply intertwined. By studying the Maya, we do more than explore the past. We gain the chance to better understand ourselves, the diverse paths of human development, and the complex relationships between humanity, nature, and each other. The mysteries of the Maya remain only partly unraveled. Their ancient cities still guard many secrets, while their descendants continue to preserve and enrich their unique culture. Our journey into their world, begun today, is truly only beginning. Each newly deciphered inscription, each archaeological discovery, and every encounter with the living Maya, people opens new horizons for understanding and admiration of this great civilization. Thank you for your attention and for joining me on this long and, I hope, fascinating journey into the world of the Maya civilization. I am happy to answer your questions